today with us on the Keenan Yoga podcast, we have James Nestor. I'm very excited to have you, James. He's the author of the book, The Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. And everyone's read that now. So pleased to have you on, James, to ask a few questions to you.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. As I said, it has become a very, very popular book. Did you expect it to be so popular?
Oh, of course, I had planned this meticulously my whole life. No, you don't know the vagaries of publishing. Some books hit, many books don't. 95% of books lose money. So you just have no idea when you release it. You know, your fingers are crossed, but you have no idea what to expect.
Finally, the first book that made anyone any money for a long time.
Maybe so. Yeah.
But I mean, the interesting thing was that, I mean, I'd heard of you before. I read the book and I assumed it was another breathing expert on talking about breathing. But, you know, James is actually a journalist, if you didn't know. And that was your mainstay of work, I assume, for your professional life. And it was actually through your personal discovery of the importance of breath in your own life you got into it. You sort of preface what you found out in terms of, you know, your own journey with it and how you started into it.
Well, it's a very cliched way of getting into a research subject, and mine, experience was really no different. I had a bunch of breathing problems, and I wasn't getting anyone to help me with them. I was having persistent bronchitis. I was having mild pneumonia at least once a year, and I was given a Z-Pack, antibiotics, which would usually take care of it until it just came back more furiously the next year or several months afterwards. So I, got frustrated after 3 or 4 years of this and started sniffing around. I'm a journalist. That's what I do. I wasn't writing too much about health at this time. This is like 12 years ago, so a long time ago. And I'm not saying that what I did is scientifically confirmed, because this wasn't a randomized controlled trial, but I've not had any breathing issues since I fixed my breathing. And I thought, maybe there's something to all this.
And what does that, I mean, to start off, I suppose, what does it mean then now, having done a lot of research, which you have on the breath, what does it mean to breathe poorly? What does a bad breathing habit look like for people? Most of us probably don't know we're breathing badly. Just think, breath doesn't feel appropriate, but what does that mean?
Well, what does bad breathing look like? It looks like 99% of the people on the street that you're seeing. And a lot of people don't show this. Obviously, you don't see them breathing in and out of their mouth. It's much more subtle, but they're breathing dysfunctionally. This was a factoid I had a real hard time of getting my head around until I talked to so many experts in the field. And they said, look at the amount of people with asthma, anxiety, panic, cardiorespiratory issues when they're exercising, snoring, sleep apnea, on and on and on. And it turns out the vast majority of the population right now is suffering from some sort of breathing dysfunction. We can get by, we can live, but it doesn't mean we're healthy. And that's what I really tried to explore in the book.
I think that's a confusion. I heard you speak on another podcast say, well, you can get by on pizza, a few slices of pizza a day, but doesn't mean, you're thriving exactly.
Pizza's delicious, and everyone loves cookies and Twinkies, but try eating that way and you'll end up like, 48% of Americans right now in really bad shape with metabolic syndrome. So these things can provide you with calories, but there are other things beyond calories. And just like breathing dysfunctionally will provide you with oxygen, enough air to stay alive, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to really prosper and live a long and healthy life if you're breathing dysfunctionally.
And does that mean that just simply, I mean, you mentioned breathing through the mouth as one obvious thing, and some people, kind of current breathing experts I see on Instagram, and are like, they just mainly go on about mouth breathing. Is it that simple, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, that's cool if they want to do that. Mouth breathing is important, but it's only one component. There are many different legs of that stool of healthy breathing, and I think that's a good place to start, because up to 50% of the population is breathing through their mouth at night. About 65% of the population breathes through the mouth. I was one of those people throughout my whole life, and I didn't realize what a hit this was taking to my health, periodontal health, facial growth, increased risk of respiratory problems, increased snoring, sleep apnea. I mean, this list goes on. And this isn't some hypothesis. This is clearly documented in scientific papers. So I think once you realize that nasal breathing has so many benefits, and by just switching the pathway through which you breathe air can really enhance your health in so many ways, people tend to glom onto that. But you can't just be a nasal breather and think you're good to go. That's a lot of it, but there are other parts to it.
But I think, I mean, I always assumed that I was breathing well because I breathed through my nose. And then I didn't realize that at nighttime, I mean, my wife started to say you're snoring a lot, and I started to realize, I don't know that I'm breathing through my mouth. Like a lot of the time I'm breathing through my mouth. So, I mean, the biggest fix, which I think turned me onto the book in the first place, was just thinking, my nighttime sleep, I'm not sleeping properly. And I'm waking up, as I get older, especially feeling awful, and having done that, simply having done the mouth tape. And I have to say, I haven't done so much else so far, apart from read your book, particularly, and do the mouth taping. And I felt a lot better when, which I suppose segues onto an interesting part in James's book where he's talking about having done this experiment where you literally tape the nose or plug the nose up. So him and his friend, another expert on breathing, are breathing through just the mouth for 10 days, was it?
Yeah, we were mouth breathing for 10 days and then nasal breathing for 10 days and comparing data sets. We were recording what was happening to our brain function. We even did a bunch of blood work, blood pressure, HRV, CO2, and more. And we knew this wasn't going to be a good time because I had done enough research knowing all of the deleterious effects of mouth breathing, but we didn't know it was going to be this bad. And we didn't know it was going to happen so quickly. It was really, really bad. I think everyone was shocked by how quickly your health can deteriorate when you just switch to mouth breathing, which is why during allergy season, so many people suffer from migraines, lower back pain. They can't sleep. They're irritable. And so much of that is tied to the pathway through which they breathe air. Their noses are clogged because of allergies and become mouth breathers. And they're given all these drugs that don't do anything. And they wonder why they aren't working. So that's what this experiment was really looking at. It was for me to personally experience what I had heard in so many different studies. And all I can say is, don't do it, people. Don't do it 10 days of forced mouth breathing. It sucks. It was terrible. And I still have, every time I think about it, not pleasant memories.
Yeah, no, that sounds absolutely awful. And I was kind of very, very intrigued in reading that passage, what would happen to you and your friend after those days. And the other thing which really strikes me now, I'm coming to think about it, was the time that you, the other experiment, which I thought was quite a big one in the book, which was breathing carbon dioxide. Just want to mention that, because we hear now, I mean, you might have heard of someone like Patrick McEwen's oxygen advantage, that carbon dioxide is actually necessary to breathe, and you yourself have talked about carbon dioxide importance, I think, in diving and restraining the amount of oxygen that's necessary. Do you want to just talk about the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen a little bit?
Yeah, I learned so much of this from Patrick McEwen, who I'm lucky enough to have as a friend, and I've read all of his books, and we talk quite often. So the deal is, so many people are obsessed with oxygen and oxygen levels, and that's important. Of course it's important, but your oxygen can't really have any function in your body unless it releases into cells. And the only way it does that is with this exchange of carbon dioxide for oxygen. I won't get it into the biochemistry too much because it gets really complicated. But just know, if you are over breathing, if you're breathing too much, your oxygen levels may be fine, but you're not offloading that oxygen because you have a smaller amount of carbon dioxide. So you want to have a balance of these two things, carbon dioxide and oxygen. And by breathing more slowly, breathing through the nose, calming down the breath, even doing some breath holds, this allows you to build up those healthy levels of carbon dioxide. So that's the CO2 stuff with breathing. But CO2 also has other benefits. Specifically, it's been used for more than 100 years to help treat different mental conditions, anxiety, even schizophrenia, and other issues, athletic performance, and more. And the thinking is that these people, especially people with panic and anxiety and asthma, have programmed themselves to breathe way too much. If you look at an asthmatic or someone with anxiety, especially when they're entering into an attack, they start breathing because they've associated that increase of carbon dioxide with a breath hold. They don't want to hold their breath because when they're holding their breath, they associate that with a panic attack. I know this is really complicated, but hopefully those basics make a little bit of sense. So the point of this carbon dioxide therapy, then, I finally got to it here, is that it is reprogramming these chemoreceptors, these different cells and structures in the body to handle more CO2 naturally. So your body won't default into this alarm network. The short version, the very, very short summary, you can ignore everything I just said there, is CO2 allows you to become more flexible. And people with anxiety and panic and asthma need to become more flexible in their respiratory health, period.
And it also allows you to develop stamina. Is that correct? It's kind of like to do with athletic abilities. I noticed you mentioning this BOLT test, which I never quite grasped. Does that have anything to do with the CO2?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So if you look at ancient Qigong practices, so many of them are based on either breathing very slowly and then holding your breath. Breathing very slowly and holding your breath. If you look at pranayama exercises, one translation for that is, this practice of holding your breath. The cessation of your breath. So that's what pranayama means, holding your breath. And those practices are, you breathe a lot, and then you hold your breath, and then you breathe a lot and you hold your breath. Every time you're holding your breath, you're raising your CO2. And when you're raising your CO2, you're becoming more flexible. You're accepting more CO2 in your body, which is why it becomes easier and easier to hold your breath the longer you do these practices, because that CO2 threshold is rising just a little bit more. And this is one of the reasons why these therapies, CO2 therapy, is a way of hacking a breath hold. It's a cheat. It's a quick way of getting there. So you don't have to sit around in yoga pants holding your breath for months. The CO2 does that for you. And what was so amazing to me is that there is so much legitimate science from Yale, from prestigious institutions, showing how effective CO2 therapy is, especially for anxiety and panic. And then it just disappeared. And now it's coming back. Because it was just, it was too important and too legitimate to completely ignore.
And when you're talking about CO2 therapy, you're talking about literally taking a breath full of just of that. And he describes it in the book, and it's kind of interesting because you describe it as quite a kind of anxious making, I think, right? You kind of feel that you can't breathe.
It's terrible. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to turn anyone off from doing this. If you get a chance to, it'll very much help improve your issues and may even cure your problems. But the process sucks. What it does is it creates a panic attack. I've been lucky enough to never have a panic attack. It's when you lose the ability to take another breath. You have so much constriction here, you can't take another breath. And that's what CO2 does. Like, it is heavy duty stuff. Also gets you extremely high, which is why schizophrenics and other people in mental hospitals really liked it. It's because it gives you this great high, and you breathe so much better afterwards.
Wow. Just to rehack, or to go back slightly, why have we got into this state in the first place? You particularly mention a lot of your thoughts on this are to do with the chewing and the way that we haven't evolved large enough mouths to take. But I've never quite understood that, because we're not breathing in our mouths in the first place. So why would our faces have evolved through lack of chewing meat and roots, etc., to then have constricted our airways? If that's the theory.
Yeah. So scientific fact. I thought it was a hypothesis. Then I thought it was a theory, but it's a fact. You can look at ancient skulls. They all have perfectly straight teeth. They all have very wide jaws. And if you have a wide jaw and straight teeth, that is indicative of having a wider upper palate here. If you have a wider upper palate in your mouth, you have larger sinus cavities. It's more easy to breathe in and out of your nose. And you see this with skulls, and I've looked at dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. This huge flat upper palate. So the vast majority of people on the planet, if you have a clean thumb or finger, you can put it in your mouth, feel the upper palate of your mouth there, and there's a very good chance there's going to be this deep indentation up there, okay? That means you have a V-shaped arch. And when you have this deep indentation, that's taking away real estate from the sinus cavities, which can impede your ability to breathe easy breaths in and out of the nose. So how did this all happen? It happened with industrialized foods. So that's really the thing. Throughout evolution, like if you look at the Homo species from 2 million and a half years ago, they had very different jaws, and then we evolved as we learned how to cook food. We were fine because that process of evolution took hundreds of thousands of years. And so, 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, we were breathing just fine. But the advent of industrialized foods happened instantaneously in countries. So in a single generation, 50% of the population went from having straight teeth to crooked teeth because their mouths were shrinking so much. Slender face, smaller mouth, smaller airway, breathing issues.
And I assume that's been documented, right? Within a generation, that's been documented. Wow.
Absolutely, it was documented in the 1930s. Yeah. In the first generation, 50% of the population would have crooked teeth. In the second generation, 70. Third generation, 80. Fourth generation, here we are, about 95% of the population has crooked teeth. And people think crooked teeth is a genetic thing, but it's not. We can mark the exact point in which our species suddenly got crooked teeth. The only species in the history of animals on Earth that suddenly all got crooked teeth because our mouths shrank.
When was that?
It depends where you were. So
right.
Britain was one of the very first countries to adopt this industrialized diet. Then it went right over to France. Then it went to Denmark. Then, and the last cultures that there's still a few out there that aren't eating, very few out there aren't eating industrialized foods. Even up into the 80s, there were people researching these cultures that were converting to this canned, bottled, processed garbage and watching almost in real time as the next generation was having crooked teeth and respiratory problems. So we know the cause, and that's the cause.
Do you think you had to go down? I mean, in the book, you talk about going underground to mausoleums in Paris to find the skulls. Did you think that was necessary, or was that journalistic kind of hyperbole?
100% unnecessary. Don't do that. However, I'm going to tell you why I did that. I could not get into a lab. I was trying to get into a lab, into a museum. I said, hey, I'm working on this book about breathing. I want to look at. Nobody wrote me back. And the people who did said, buzz off. So I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to look at these skulls. I wanted to really see it because I had read it in books, and I got an opportunity to go down and see hundreds and hundreds of skulls from long time ago, from thousands of years ago to just a couple hundred years ago. And it was at that moment that I realized this was a thread I wanted to pick up in the book and follow. And I did. And it just stunned me that no one's talking about this, that I didn't learn this in college or high school or grade school, that evolution, everyone thinks evolution is always working towards our benefit, natural selection, stronger, better. It's not. We're developing traits that are not advantageous to our long-term survival. Just go outside and look at people, and you can see that for yourself.
Surely there must be a stress quotidien involved, though. Like, as modern evolutionary aspects affect the jaw, the industrialization would affect the stress and the emotional difficulties on people.
Of course.
How do you see that playing out? Yeah.
Look at us. I mean, look at, I don't know how things are where you are, but the US is just, it's a disaster here health wise. You've got, 10% of the kids have ADHD, 50% are obese. Everyone has anxiety. I mean, it's just chronic health issues are rampant here. So I'm not saying that these shifts in our skeleton of our face were the culprit behind all of these modern chronic diseases. It's so many other things too, right? It's the food supply, it's the air quality, it's sitting around inside 90% of the time, it's being stressed about everything. So all of those things have colluded. They've all come together to make us really sick.
You didn't mention it in the book, but I heard it on a podcast. You speaking more recently. You've got this instrument where you measure the levels of is it oxygen inside a room? We just mention that a little bit.
Carbon dioxide,
right? Yeah,
which is indicative of the higher the CO2 is in a room, then usually the lower the oxygen is, unless they're pumping in oxygen. So this is another thing that this didn't make it into the book because I just heard about it, a couple of years after the book had come out, and I got curious. So I travel a ton. I'm always on the road. I'm on airplanes, hotels, public transportation. I was just curious about the air quality, specifically the oxygen levels and the CO2 levels. And I'm just absolutely floored by how bad it is almost everywhere. I don't know if you're in a lot of hotels, but now they're basically owned by like one company, and they've gone and just glued up the windows so you can't open them so they can save on heating and cooling costs. But what they didn't do is pump in fresh air. So some of these hotels are at toxic levels of CO2, and you wonder why you just feel like crap when you get off of a plane. So now I'm that annoying guy, having my assistant call and try to find hotels like the old ones, independent hotels, where you can open this thing called a window and get some fresh air in there, because it makes such a difference, especially when you're traveling a lot.
And you mentioned the plane situation and the fact that, especially before you've taken off and they're not putting any oxygen in. And then, because I noticed it, I'm not someone who, I'm kind of quite an active person, let's say, not someone who falls asleep in the day or naps, but as soon as I'm on that plane, I'm straight asleep. And I was like, why is that? I thought it's the momentum, but it's suggesting now that actually it's that I've got no oxygen.
They're conking you out, and especially at the beginning. So what is considered a toxic level is 2,000 parts per million. Anywhere around 1,200 parts per million, 1,500 parts per million, they've found that test scores are 50% lower than they are with regular room air, right? So this is, and by 2,500 parts per million, you've got headaches, you've got difficulty breathing. I've recorded levels in airplanes of 3,500 parts per million. So it's 1,500 parts per million over what is considered toxic. And you wonder why you're just there, because your body is starting to shut down. That's what it's doing. Luckily, once they get going, the air quality improves, but it's never very good, ever. And I've recorded this in numerous airlines on numerous trips. And so what we're hoping to do whenever I get a minute to do this is to start a campaign. Governments aren't going to do anything, because the governments are in cahoots with the hotel companies, which are in cahoots with the, airplane companies. So I think what's going to happen is awareness to the public. So I want to arm like 100 people who travel a lot with these sensors, and we're going to start telling people who has the best air and who has the worst air. And we're going to do this through social media so that people can make the right decisions. And I think it's only through that these companies are going to pay attention, because they're just not right now. And what's so frustrating too is it used to be so much better when we had just, windows. Before all these buildings, I hate to say it, but a lot of these LEED certified green buildings have the worst air quality because they don't allow you to open up a window anymore. They just want to recycle that air to save a little bit of energy. But what about your health and all the energy that's going to cost from you being unhealthy for the next 30 years?
Yeah. But then what do you do in things like, I mean, I'm thinking about, when I'm in Asia and air conditioning and the fact that I haven't got air conditioning on, I can't work, it's too bloody hot, And then you're speaking on the podcast I heard recently and saying, well, I think the guy was surprised, thinking, well, don't they bring the air from outside and kind of cool it and take it out again? And of course, it's just recycled, isn't it? What do you do about that then? I mean, and I sleep. I mean, unfortunately, I sleep with that one as well. At night time because it's so hot.
It doesn't take much. So if you have a window and you just open it a crack, that can make a big difference. And I know because I've recorded it throughout the night to see. So it doesn't take much. You're going to lose a little bit of energy efficiency, but not much. So that's what I would pay attention to. Of course, you need aircon when you're in Indonesia in July or something, right? You're going to die if you don't have it. And aircon's great, but just opening up a window a little bit, especially in long Uber rides, or if you're, which I have to take quite often, all the windows are closed. This is like in flu season. All it takes, I've noticed, is like an inch or half an inch just to get some air circulating. It's going to annoy your driver, but you're paying for the ride anyway. So that's what it is.
Do you have any, I mean, just on that subject, do you have any other hacks that you recommend? I mean, you talked a little bit about training as well. And a lot of people go to the gym and do kind of some exercise and trying to train yourself also to breathe more efficiently then, which I think people might be interested in hearing about.
Well, you're a yogi. You know the importance of breathing and proper biomechanics when you're breathing and doing different yoga poses. That's what yoga is. And if you lose connection with your breathing when you're doing yoga, then you're no longer doing yoga. You're doing some pretty dysfunctional stretching. So I think you can apply that to other exercises. If you want to utilize oxygen efficiently, if you want to be able to fuel all your cells in the right way, then you have to learn how to breathe properly. And I would do this as the very first step before you get very interested in whatever activity you're doing. And this is what elite trainers are doing with all of their athletes, is they're sitting them down and they're fixing their breathing first before they do anything else. One thing you can do beyond nasal breathing is to focus on diaphragmatic breathing, breathing more deeply. And this is something a lot of gym rats, especially bros, dudes, don't want to do, is when you take an inhale to expand your belly down here, they feel that makes their, six-pack abs look not as hot. To expand your belly. So what they do when they inhale is they suck in their belly. This is so bad for your body and it's so inefficient for getting oxygen. So if you could just get a little more comfortable with yourself, and every time you're inhaling, that slight expansion, and it's not just in the belly, it's 360 degrees, right? You want to feel the expansion down there. That means your diaphragm is descending down deep. And if you're a weightlifter, if you're a rower, if you're a cyclist, this is so important to do. And listen, you're going to look great. Your abs are going to look great no matter what. You don't have to worry about that. But learn how to breathe properly and you'll feel great as well.
We haven't talked about yoga yet, but now you mention it. It is ostensibly a yoga podcast, so we probably should. Patrick, in his newest book, which is, I can't remember the title now, but it's about yoga breathing or breathing in yoga. And he mentions that the diaphragm is like a transistor. You can use it for thoracic breathing in the thoracic cavity, or you can use it for abdominal breathing. But it sounds like you have a kind of different idea on that potentially.
When you start getting into the particulars of yoga and yoga practices, you can do all kinds of things with your breath. You can breathe in and out through your mouth. And that's great because you're doing it for a controlled amount of time for a specific reason. You can breathe, focusing that breath into your chest, or focus that breath deeper down into your belly. So it depends what the goal is, and it depends what you want to accomplish. So I love that book by Patrick. I don't agree with it entirely. Just to be clear, we don't agree on everything. That doesn't mean I hate the guy or am going to slander him. That's just our differences of opinion. I'm much more into really intense Kundalini, active breathing. I think there are so many benefits. I've felt it myself, seen it for other people. Patrick hates it He says yoga breathing should be soft and smooth and deep. And that's fine. That works for him and other people that follow along with that protocol. But, everyone's different. And so I think you have to assess what your body needs at that moment.
I was going to mention that anyway. Is that what's called holotropic breathing? Is that kind of like a kind of hyperventilation, right? And you mentioned that, not in the book, but elsewhere. And do you want to, speak about that?
Sure. So, about these vigorous breathing techniques, Patrick has said, well, they aren't in ancient yoga literature, which is true. But what I've heard from several yogis is that yoga changes per the needs of the population. So I think that these practices, these vigorous practices, likely developed in the last few hundred years because our culture rapidly changed and people felt a deep benefit from these invigorating techniques, just as I mentioned, just as I have. So then you have something like holotropic breathwork, which is based on zero yoga, like nothing at all. And, it's a technique in which you just breathe intensely for 3 straight hours. And some people get some benefits to it. There are a lot of case studies showing a lot of people have significantly benefited. Beyond that, is there a ton of science behind it? Not really, but I'm not going to poo-poo it because a lot of people like it. Me personally, I think you can get to that point through other routes that are more nourishing for the body. But that's just my personal opinion.
What's it meant to do? I mean, it's kind of give you a mental high, but by reducing oxygen in the brain. Is that the idea?
Exactly what it's doing. And the thing that I thought was so strange when I was taking these holotropic breathwork classes is the instructors were saying, we're creating so much oxygen into your body that your body is able to heal itself and enter these different states of consciousness. The exact opposite is happening. You are denying your body oxygen, specifically your brain oxygen, which is why your hands start curling up and they get very cold. So the messaging needs to be fixed with holotropic breathwork, which isn't to say it's not therapeutic. By denying your brain oxygen for a long amount of time, that helps to rewire it. Some people think it helps trigger different structures of the brain to think that the body is dying, so it releases all these different chemicals in the body. We just don't know too much about holotropic breathwork beyond the fact that some people like it and some people really report some benefits.
I think you do go somewhere in the book and mention that you've done something like that, and you say, it doesn't seem like it's done what it's meant to for you, and you say you go back into your car and eat a sandwich or something. And reflect.
Warm can of beer. It just wasn't, but I didn't mean to be disrespectful of people who enjoy holotropic breathwork. I was just speaking honestly and clearly from my viewpoint. I just thought the culture around that was overshadowing the practice. You have this very precious culture where people, like within 5 minutes, people thought they had become wolves and shit, and again, that's totally cool for them. I would love to become a wolf, but I was like, how much of this is, confirmation bias? Versus how much of it is physiological.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what about the diaphragm? Then going back to that again, because I just want to mention that a lot of people don't really know what it means to feel that you're breathing diaphragmatically. I mean, and is it possible to have a frozen diaphragm? I think you do mention that in the book that there's someone who's curing singers and another, he's a conductor or something. He's curing people through diaphragmatic breathing. And I think it's true. I mean, I think generally speaking, it seems like most of us, we're going to breathe with somewhat the diaphragm, but the accentuation of that breath seems to me the mainstay of yoga breathing, just to accentuate the diaphragmatic breath.
Absolutely. So some factoids that I had heard is the average person on the street can use as little as 10% of their diaphragmatic movement. So what's happening here is the diaphragm is this muscle, that big parachute-shaped muscle that sits underneath the lungs. And when we exhale, it relaxes and goes up. When we inhale, it goes down like this. So a lot of people get in these very dysfunctional breathing habits in which they're just breathing into their chest. And so that diaphragm, instead of going all the way up and all the way down, it's just going like this, just barely moving at all. And the people who are the worst breathers are people with COPD or emphysema, where theirs is basically locked in shape and it just sort of quivers. It just quivers like this, which is why these people, if you ever see them, they have to use all these other muscles in the body just to take a breath of air. It's so sad when you see this. And the thing that's even sadder is they aren't giving any breathing instruction. So they're given all these other therapies, which kind of work, but they're not giving breathing instruction. And that's what this guy, Carl Stout, did. And he was able to essentially cure emphysemics of emphysema. They were able to leave the hospital. And I've heard from several of his patients. They said, this guy saved my life. And then he disappeared and no one talked about him again. So the short version of this is having that fluid motion of your diaphragm down when you're breathing in, up when you're breathing out. Not only does this allow you to take a more efficient breath, it helps your heart pump more blood. It also massages all the organs down below the lungs, which is so essential for pumping lymph fluid. So it is so important to proper health. And this is something that even people who look very healthy, like those bros at the gym, they just aren't moving their diaphragm down enough. And they're really compromising their health and not taking advantage of the full benefits of their breathing.
Mm. And as I've come to use that more, I started to think there's something with their neck that's intimately related to this diaphragm, right? And the really ironic and unfortunate thing about a lot of yoga, and the style I teach particularly, which is Ashtanga yoga, is that it actually kind of almost suggests in the Ujjayi breath that there's a contraction of the neck, which then leads to people breathing more shallowly and less diaphragmatically than they may have originally breathed.
But if you're doing Ujjayi breath and you're doing it properly, and you're breathing in through your nose and you're breathing very slowly to count about 6 or even 8, and you're relaxing your belly, that's a deep, nourishing breath. And when you're breathing out then, and you're making that slight constriction at the back of the throat, I think this is a really beneficial breath. I don't think you need to stick out your neck to do it so much. I think that you can naturally do it in proper posture. So I don't know if that's something that's taught in yoga techniques, is to stick out your neck when you're doing Ujjayi, but I don't see any benefit to doing that. And I think that's such a powerful and simple breathing practice.
I think rather what I was thinking is that it's not taught in conjunction with the diaphragm, so it ends up just being a constriction of the throat, rather than the fact that you're narrowing the airways of the throat to create some kind of pressure discrepancy, which then utilizes the diaphragm into that vacuum further. And the two tools, I see the two tools, the neck and the diaphragm, to be inextricably related. I think that's what I was suggesting. But they need to be taught together. And when the Ujjayi is taught just as a sound, then it ends up to be kind of constricting these, sternocleidomastoid muscles in the throat, and nothing much happens anywhere else.
Beautifully said. You're 100% right. When I used to teach people the basics of breathing, I would start with the nose, and then I realized I'm doing this all wrong, because people were then nasal breathing, still chest breathing, and not relaxing their diaphragm. So now the very first thing I have them do is to place a hand right around where their belly button is. And we don't go forward to step 2 until they get that expansion on that inhale and that slight contraction on the exhale. And for some people, that can take several minutes, several hours. Other people, several days to really get that down. And I think that's the first thing that I do. And people can do this in whatever order they want. There's no judgment. But that's the first thing that I've learned I do. And this look on people's faces when they do that, they're so surprised of this feeling down deep in their body. That's the feeling of breathing normally.
Yeah. it's surprising to kind of to be natural, to live naturally and feel naturally these days, I think. James, I recognise our time's coming to an end. What are you doing these days? You mentioned teaching a little bit on the breathing. I didn't realise you were doing much of that. I assume you're writing another book. What's coming up?
I am knee deep in another book, about halfway through, which is why I've crawled back into my little sad hole here, and have just been writing away in solitude, which has been awesome. And I'm out on the road and researching, going around the world, finding some really crazy stuff. Beyond that, we're still doing retreats just because I love it. I love to see people transform in real time over a few days. So we're doing a couple of those a year. That's as much as I can fit into the schedule, in which we take people, and the vast majority of these people have never done any healthy breathing practice in their life. And we show them what healthy breathing is. And by the end of it, we've created monsters, and they go out and spread this knowledge. So that's the point of doing those. But that's basically it. I'm still doing some private speaking stuff, but mostly working on the new book.
And I assume that's something to do with breathing. Unless you're going out
Zero, nothing.
No, really?
Nothing. Everyone's like, when's breath 2 coming out? Breathe deeper. It's not coming out. I'm not writing it. I wrote one book about breathing. I did the best I could. I'm going to update the paperback version in the US with some of this new stuff we talked about, CO2 in the environment. But beyond that, this is my book about breathing. I'm going into a completely different direction with some completely different stuff.
Yeah, exciting. We'll have to wait for that. Okay, last question. Give me a guilty pleasure and an inspiration. We always do this with a guest, and I'll do it with you since I don't know you at all. Guilty pleasure and inspiration. Quickly, and don't think too much.
Guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
Oh, you really stumped me on this. I have no guilty pleasure. I don't have any guilt about the stuff I do. Skipping out from working on my book to go surfing too often. So that's my guilty pleasure. What's the other part of this?
An inspiration, like something that inspires you, a person, a place, or a book, or anything like that that comes to your mind. Keeps you going.
What has inspired me lately is solitude. I've been out on the road for a lot, and so to follow my curiosity is the most inspiring thing on the planet for me.
All right. Thanks very much, James. Okay. It's been a pleasure to have you. And
thank you very much.
Well, look forward to your new book. Cheers.
Okay.
Bye for now.